Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week is MAGA movement a cult? And is modern politics a cult? Stick around because the answer might surprise you, and we have a cult expert with us today to help us answer this question.
Hello, I'm Rick Allen Ross, founder and executive director of the Cult Education Institute and the author of the book Cults Inside Out. I frequently testify as an expert witness in court cases across the United States involving authoritarian groups called cults.
Interesting. Can you disclose any details of like the most interesting case, for instance, for you that you've testified for?
Well, in recent years, I've testified in a number of cases. One that occurred last year was a leader by the name of Eligio Bishop, whose nickname was Nature Boy online. He had
Mhm.
tens of thousands of followers on Twitter and a YouTube channel where he recruited and indoctrinated people. He was tried for unlawful imprisonment and rape in Atlanta, Georgia, and I testified against him for the prosecution. He's now serving a life sentence without parole in the Georgia state prison system. Another leader that is rather infamous is Keith Raniere, who was the leader of a cult called Nexium. And I testified in his federal criminal trial in New York. Raniere was first exposed through the Cult Education Institute, publishing papers that revealed the ways in which he manipulated people based on the criteria of thought reform and coercive persuasion.
That's very interesting. I'm actually from New York, so I remember I know that case. But that so earlier, and I mean behind the scenes a little bit, we talked about what makes something a cult, right? Could you please come back to that and just maybe not so openly because obviously you don't want to repeat it twice, but what are the main characteristics of a cult?
There are three core characteristics that form the nucleus of virtually every definition of a destructive cult. The first and single most salient feature is a charismatic leader who becomes an object of worship. Whatever that leader says is right is right. Whatever he says is wrong is wrong. He is the defining element and driving force of the group and possesses dictatorial powers without meaningful accountability. Second, the leader uses identifiable techniques of thought reform or coercive persuasion to manipulate people and gain undue influence. This can be seen by members acting consistently against their own best interest, but consistently in the best interests of the leader and the group. And then finally, the leader exploits the undue influence he has to take advantage of and do harm to his followers. You take these three core characteristics together, and you can see what defines a destructive cult, and you can see the warning signs for being aware of a destructive cult.
Would you say that there were cults like that in politics in I guess, the time of our existence, so in modern times?
Well, in modern times, what we can see is that the Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler can be seen as a political cult. Likewise, the fascists under Benito Mussolini in Italy during World War II likewise could be seen as a political cult. And the regime of North Korea, led by Kim, can be seen today as a political cult. All of these movements had an absolute totalitarian dictatorial leader who became an object of worship, was the defining element and driving force of these political regimes. We can see that in the worship of Kim in North Korea and through a belief system called Juche that is the underpinning of the Kim regime. So he is an object of worship. And you can see that again by the statues erected in his honor and the billboards proclaiming him as a great leader. And he really has no accountability. And you can also see the telltale signs of thought reform through Kim's control of media and for that matter, virtually all exchange of information within North Korea.
Would you agree? So, while you were talking about this, right? To me, all of that sounds like MAGA movement in the United States. To me, that sounds like Donald Trump, because I've one of the core characteristics is that your leader can do no wrong, right? So, for instance, there have been a lot of videos on social media lately coming from Trump supporters. So what people on the other spectrum of the politics have started doing is they started feeding AI scenarios that are ridiculous, right? And then putting them online as if Donald Trump decided to do so, or decided to say that, or decided to sign an executive order in that manner, and feeding that to his supporters, and then seeing his supporters basically defending him, right? And then they call it out because they're like, hey, this is not even happening, but you're over here listening to this crazy rhetoric, and you're looking for excuses as to why this is actually reasonable because he's just smart or whatever. So would you think that MAGA movement in the United States is shaping up to be a cult?
No, I really wouldn't. And I'll tell you why. Because if Donald Trump tomorrow would say that he wanted to create a visa worker system for migrants from Latin America to take jobs in the US, and that he wanted to grant many people without documents in the US now some type of status, legal status, I think that the people that have voted for him and support him would go directly against him. Another example would be when he did a speech in Alabama and he started to support the idea of vaccines and he encouraged the audience to get vaccinated. He was booed. Cult leaders don't get booed. And so what that illustrates is more that Donald Trump is a vessel for the MAGA movement. And I think the people that support him represent a coalition within the Republican Party of people that have deeply held beliefs regarding religion, uh, the right to firearms, and immigration. And some would say that they are very concerned about the changing demographics in the United States. Currently, the United States is 57% Caucasian American. There is a growing minority that will become a majority in the near future, where the white population of the United States will be less than the combined aggregate of other races and cultures. I think this has caused friction in the United States. And Donald Trump correctly identified that as an issue within the Republican Party that he could run on. And he has been very successful in conveying that message and getting people to support him who believe in that. But he was elected. He is accountable to the courts, to the laws of the United States. And also, the people that voted for him, they already had their convictions, their beliefs. He didn't change them, as cult leaders typically do through coercive persuasion or thought reform. Instead, he gave them a voice and he validated their concerns. And I think it's very important that when we look at politics, whether it's in the US or in Europe or wherever, that we do not use the word cult as an invective to denigrate people. I think that that diminishes the genuine suffering of cult members who I've worked with for decades.
I mean, I understand and I see where you're coming from. I personally, right, and I listen. I don't want to diminish anything that that anyone in a cult is going through. I personally have a very strong sort of not curiosity, but interest in cults. It started from the fact that I studied graphic design and I have a degree in psychology and graphic design. And so when I was studying Hitler's Germany, I actually started studying it not from the same like starting point as everyone else does, but from a starting point of how design creates cults, right? So for me, it was interesting in terms of how the swastika came to be, why it came to be, the uniforms, the everything, sort of like what that encompassed and how that played into the idea of a cult. But so when you say that you think that that Donald Trump's electorate would go against him if tomorrow he said he wants to give a citizenship to migrants of color, for instance. This is what I was talking about prior when I was saying that, people on the other side of the political spectrum have been coming up with AI articles and basically like very believable scenarios where Donald Trump does things that go against their beliefs and they feed it to them and then see what their reactions are. And the majority of these MAGA people, they would stand up for him and say that this is a part of a bigger plan. He's 10 steps ahead, that if he's doing this, then this is because he knows how to like manipulate the system to then like, to then come to what like, to then basically benefit them and benefit whatever it is that they wanted to do. So, in a lot of cases, and I'm obviously these are small studies because they just started popping up online, but in a lot of cases, the people that follow the MAGA movement actually do, in fact, at this point in 2025, stand up for him and do defend his actions. And if their actions against like whatever it is that he ran on and against hate, they in a lot of cases will say that it's because he's 10 steps ahead and it's part of like some inexistent plan. Does that change your evaluation in any way?
No, because I haven't seen a situation where the core beliefs of the so-called MAGA movement, which is basically the Republican Party, have been contradicted by Donald Trump. And then that contradiction has been embraced by the majority of the Republican Party. What I've seen instead is that people in the Republican Party, whenever Donald Trump deviates from their core beliefs, they can become critical. And those beliefs are essentially the boundaries by which Donald Trump must navigate as president and as the leader of the Republican Party. The Republican Party evolved over a period of decades, beginning with Richard Nixon in what was called the Southern Strategy. Nixon wanted to court Democrats in the southern states of the United States and convince them that they should vote Republican. And so in many ways, he insinuated that he was against some of the civil rights that were being passed by the United States Congress and signed off by the president. And so many of these formerly Dixie Democrats became Republicans. And then you can also see the strategy of Ronald Reagan in the 80s to court the religious right. And George W. Bush, an evangelical Christian who was widely appreciated by the evangelical right or the white evangelicals. So you have a coalition of white evangelicals, people concerned with race issues, race relations, and you also have First Amendment people that feel that their religion is under attack if they are white evangelicals, or Second Amendment gun rights advocates. And this coalition became more and more the dominant force of the Republican Party. And so Donald Trump, when he famously came down the escalator to run for president in New York, courted that constituency and honed his message to address their concerns, their feelings regarding how they wanted to shape and change the U.S. Now, if Donald Trump contradicted those core beliefs, as I said, for example, he wanted to have a worker program, a worker visa program that would allow people that are now being deported to stay in the U.S. and work. Or if he were to say, I am totally against the idea that the United States is a Christian nation. And I think we have to separate church and state. And if he enunciated that as a primary plank of his belief system, I think he would have opposition from the majority of the Republican Party. So instead, what Donald Trump seems to do, in my opinion, is in a very calculated way, reflect the sentiments of the majority of the Republican Party. And that's why he has the support of the Republican Party.
Interesting. So this is not necessarily a core belief, right? Well, for the Republican Party, it is. Do you think that throughout the history, since the Cold War and since World War II, do Americans, especially in the Republican Party, believe that Russia is a threat and an enemy and an adversary?
Well, this is an interesting thing because for decades, the United States was opposed, and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were
Yeah.
opposed to the expansion of Russia and, the Russian Empire. And after the wall came down in Berlin and Eastern Europe was liberated and Ukraine became a country and so forth,
Mhm.
the United States strongly supported those countries. So Donald Trump has, in his advocacy for America First, he has really promoted a kind of isolationist philosophy. But that has roots in the Republican Party going back to before World War II.
But I'm not.
So I think I think we shouldn't confuse politics with cults, unless they're saying Heil Hitler, or in some way reflecting that the leader is the party, is the movement. And I think under Adolf Hitler, under Benito Mussolini, and currently under Kim in North Korea, you can see that it's a personality-driven movement with dictatorial leaders that have absolute power. And I think we shouldn't confuse those two because, we shouldn't use the word cult in a way to denigrate people that we don't agree with. And we shouldn't say that people that we don't agree with must be brainwashed to believe differently than we do.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but I agree with you on what you said just now, but I do disagree with you. I mean, obviously, you're the cult expert, so you understand a lot more about this than I do. However, I have listened to a lot of different people who are, I guess, in your field who also believe differently than you, which is why, to me, when you say all of these things about cults, they ring the same about Donald Trump, right? Like in my head, what you're saying about cults, personality driven, like absolutely can do no wrong. Once like statues erected, they're not erected yet, I don't think, but they would be. Like the MAGA people, they buy all of this paraphernalia. The Sieg Heil to me is the Make America Great Again, like Heil Hitler. The Elon Musk on stage doing a Sieg Heil. And then there are so many different examples of how this administration just crosses and crosses and crosses these lines. And to me, what I was saying about Russia is not necessarily the politics of isolationism. I think one of the core beliefs of Americans in general is to be wary of Russia. Half of MAGA party in general and politicians, they're not promoting the politics of isolationism. They're in fact promoting the message that Russia is good, Ukraine is bad, and we should stop helping Ukraine and start having a relationship with Russia. And they're quite literally repeating Kremlin talking points. They're basically becoming Kremlin mouthpieces. So when I speak to quite a few, so I've been in the United States for 14 years and I've traveled a lot around the country. And obviously this evidence is anecdotal, right? But I have seen the shift in the sort of like what it meant to be a Republican versus what it is to be MAGA, right? It's very different. And also MAGA doesn't necessarily represent the core beliefs of Republicans anymore. It's gotten to be very radical. It's gotten to be very totalitarian because while Trump is writing these executive orders, and he can't necessarily yet again he can't implement half of them, right, or implement the majority of them. The idea is there, and that's the you know and that's what he does want to do. We see that he's narcissistic and he is egotistic, and his entire idea of like why he wants to be president is, well, to get out of jail, to also be sort of like this king on the throne, and because of the sole idea of being a president. Like, he's clearly not interested in changing a country, right? He's clearly not interested in, like, he doesn't have like sort of he doesn't necessarily care for America, because we've seen his ideas shift and change back and forth. He says one thing, he does another thing, right? So it's mostly about ego. So to me, it's very interesting that our sort of assessment here differs, because to me, every time you say something that defines a cult or give me examples from history, I see them in the MAGA movement. I just don't think we're far enough yet.
I think let's go back to those three core criteria. Number one, is Donald Trump a dictatorial leader without accountability? No, he's elected. He's accountable to the courts and to the Congress. And in the next midterm, election cycle, the Republicans may lose the House, may lose the Senate, at which time he will have opposition there. We have to recognize that a plurality of the American people voted for Donald Trump. Granted that over 40% of the United States voting public voted for Kamala Harris, but more people voted for Donald Trump than voted for Kamala Harris. And so he became the president but through a democratic elected process. This is not the same process that Keith Raniere went through to lead NXIVM, or Jim Jones did to lead the People's Temple, or Eligio Bishop, who I testified against. He did not go through such a process to lead the group he called Carbon Nation. Second, are Republicans who voted for Donald Trump or independents brainwashed? I don't think the evidence points to that. In fact, they had these sincerely held beliefs that he tapped into before he became a presidential candidate. So here's the thing. I think that for many people in the United States, there's this desire to reduce the problems that we have in our country regarding race relations and various other issues, religion, separation of church and state. We would like to believe that the people who disagree with, let's say, the more liberal faction are somehow brainwashed. Because then we can think, well, gee, maybe they can be deprogrammed, and there's like a magic bullet that will resolve all the serious problems and disagreements in the United States. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that what we are going to have to face is that a large portion of the U.S. has deeply held beliefs, in contrast to another large portion of the United States. And so there is this polarization that is often reported about. And I don't think it'll be resolved by calling one side brainwashed and dismissing their beliefs that they've held pretty much all their lives. I think when you watch a Donald Trump rally historically, what you can see is him move back and forth. He receives resounding cheers and applause. He will keep going in that direction. If he hears boos or there's not a really positive response, he may tack differently and move in a different direction. So in that sense, he's not like a cult leader. He's a pleaser, and he's tuned in to the people that support him, his base. And whatever they feel, whatever they want, he reflects. And if he doesn't get the response that is positive and reinforcing, he will then backpedal and back away from previously held position. And that's what I've seen. And that is not the behavior of someone like Keith Raniere or Jim Jones or Charlie Manson. They would not change their position to please their followers. Instead, they would say their followers must please them and,
Mhm.
excuse me, and must adhere to their stated beliefs. And if they don't like the beliefs of the leader, get out, leave.
Well, I do. Well, this is kind of like what Marjorie Taylor Greene demonstrates, right? Like, it's like if you don't believe sort of in the MAGA movement or anything that they say, it's like, get out. She doesn't want to talk to you. She doesn't want to interview you. If you question her or you question her sort of like beliefs or her authenticity, she immediately tells you to get out of the room, right? So my question here then is, how do we tackle disinformation? So you said elected. Hitler was elected, in fact. And I have like a makeup scenario actually for you with L. Ron Hubbard, for instance. So in the MAGA movement, right, the thing is, sure, there are beliefs that are held commonly across the Republican Party, right? I do think that Make America Great Again, like the people that truly very like duly believe that, the people that donate to Trump, the people that wear the hats, a lot of people voted for him without being part of like MAGA specifically. They voted for him because they believed that he's going to deport criminals. They believed that he's going to like change gas prices. A lot of people voted for him because of gas prices, not understanding how gas prices work. But one of the reasons why MAGA people get called brainwashed is because you can present them with factually correct information. As in, like, this is what Donald Trump said. It's not true. This problem doesn't exist because X, Y, and Z. And they will not believe you because they will believe Marjorie Taylor Greene. They will believe Donald Trump. They will believe whoever said that this is actually a problem. And no matter how much you knock on there, no matter what you show them, no matter what you try to present them with, they're not going to budge. And that actually have isolated a lot of families, because I've seen like political discourse, right? But I have never quite seen anything like what's going on in America today. Um, because basically like families are falling apart because their like mom, dad, uncle is MAGA, right? And they're so tired of trying to get through to them. That reminds me a little bit about of Scientologists and of like Jehovah's Witnesses and of places like that. So say L. Ron Hubbard ran for president, right? He is a cult leader. Scientology is a cult. I think there is no discourse on that in general, right? Let's say L. Ron Hubbard decided to run for president, and there were people that follow him very staunchly. And then he had, let's say, who are the Scientology crowd, right? And then let's say he wanted to implement ideas that were very much Scientology, but he wrapped them in a different wrapper for the majority of Americans, right? So then the majority of Americans who voted for him because, I don't know, he thought that psychology was a difficult subject and psychology was bad and there are better ways of like understanding the human mind, right? And he didn't call it Scientology, but he just sort of like derived from that, appealed to most Americans, and 54% of people elected him. But only, let's say, 10% of those people are staunch supporters of Scientology. The rest of them elected him because they thought that he was going to do something that doesn't even depend on him, like gas prices, right? He's still a cult leader. The people that staunchly believe Scientology are still in a cult. The rest of America that voted for him was lied to, which is how I see what happened with Make America Great Again. I think that that particular movement, like that part of people that are so ardently believing in it that it doesn't matter what he's going to say, right? I think the issue here, or sort of like the difference here, is that I'm not talking about the entire Republican electorate as being in a cult. I'm talking about this specific group of people that quite literally deifies him and sees that he can do no wrong, and is losing family connections and is being isolated and is voting against their own beliefs because they might not even believe what they're voting in. They're believing it because Marjorie Taylor Greene said it on Trump's behalf, right? Or Pete Hegseth said it, and they will justify it. How is that different?
Well, it's very different. Donald Trump really supported Hillary Clinton and Democratic people from the Democratic Party that were running for political office in New York. So he was a New Yorker. He was not a person that was identified with the right wing of the Republican Party or even the Republican Party. But when he chose to run for president, he deduced that his best chances were to run as a Republican, and he honed his message to appeal to the Republican base. The difference is that when families call me and they say, I have this MAGA member of my family, and I think they should be deprogrammed. And so what I ask them is, what is the history of this person? Were they once a liberal and now they're a conservative? Were they once a Democrat and then they became a Republican and a far right Republican? Or did many of these beliefs consistently, weren't they held by this person historically? And what I invariably hear over and over again is, well, yes, my family member was always a conservative Republican, had very different beliefs, but now they've become more shrill and they've become more confrontational. And I think that's a result of in large part, social media and the polarization of the media in the United States. So people can go into a kind of information silo online, constantly being reinforced by like-minded people, or they can watch only the news that they want to watch, whether it's MSNBC on the left or Fox News on the right. But I don't think, and that does contribute to the polarization, but I don't think that these people are brainwashed. There may be some cult-like aspects, for example, cognitive dissonance, when someone finds out that something has happened that contradicts their beliefs in a factual, real-time way. They may have a propensity to seek a spin on that situation that confirms their beliefs and really goes against the reality that is occurring. Now, I've seen that, but that in and of itself is not the only defining element of a destructive cult. And also, I would say that some people will point to Donald Trump from a narcissistic standpoint. And they'll say, well, isn't he very narcissistic like a cult leader? And isn't it true that he never admits when he's wrong and he will always try to blame others rather than accept responsibility for a mistake he may have made? I think that's valid, but that, personality attribute, being narcissistic, is not the only thing that forms a destructive cult. So I would say that again, many people in the United States would like to believe that those who disagree with them must be brainwashed, and that how you would prove that you're not brainwashed is to change your beliefs and agree with the other side. I just don't see that as consistent with what I deal with in destructive cults. What I typically see are people whose personalities have been radically changed. They've become socially isolated from family and old friends. They've repeatedly made choices that are not in their own best interests. And again, I'd circle back around and I'd look at the MAGA movement and ask, are they happy with Donald Trump? Or do they feel that he has acted against what they consider their best interests? And I would say that for the white evangelicals in the United States, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which came about through Donald Trump's appointments to the Supreme Court, really kind of made them feel, well, we voted for the right guy. And many of the executive orders that he's currently signing are in lockstep with the majority of the Republican Party's belief. Now, the Republican Party has changed. The coalition that was formed of white evangelicals, gun rights advocates, people concerned about the changing demographics of the country and immigration, that coalition that formed in the Republican Party has catalyzed, and Donald Trump is the result of it. But that doesn't change the fact that this was a long procession of history, that this occurred over decades, and that blaming it all on Donald Trump, I don't think that's fair. I think it's better to say that this really represents conflicts, divisions within the United States that have existed for many, many years historically.
Interesting. I mean, I mean, we don't have to agree on everything, right? It's that's why a conversation is interesting. Of course, like from the point of your expertise, obviously, it makes sense. But at the same time, like I do think that I don't know. So I dated someone who was a Scientologist without knowing they were a Scientologist. They came out to me as a Scientologist. I was 20 years old or 21 years old, and that's what kind of jump started my interest in cults, because I was a psychology student. So you can imagine how how much of a dissonance that was there. And also, they came out to me as a Scientologist with the first thing out of their mouth being, "Hey, I need to tell you something. It's not a cult." And I'm Ukrainian. I have never heard of Scientology before. I've lived in Ukraine, right, at that point, till I was 16. So it was like a new type of thing for me. And that's how I started researching all of it. And I think that people that sort of fall for cults are always vulnerable, right? Like cults prey on people that have vulnerabilities. Not always. I mean, it's possible to break. It's similar as like an abusive relationship, right? Where like you can have a woman who's incredibly, or a man who's incredibly confident in themselves, and then someone chips and chips and chips away at their confidence, and then they can, and that's how we get like, oh, Sarah was always so strong. I couldn't ever believe that her husband was abusing her, right? Because it's like, it doesn't happen overnight. So to me, it also seems like you said, in the Republican Party, these things don't happen overnight. They keep being knocked on and knocked on and knocked on. Like, I don't particularly believe that, let's say, most men who are now MAGA always believed manosphere, or that, like, women need to be trad wives and they should have no rights and they should like die in surgery if they have a miscarriage by accident, right, or something like that. I do think that these beliefs were there to a degree, to a much smaller degree, and then people like Trump, and then subsequently Andrew Tate, and the rise of these like far right extremists in terms of like beliefs, right? They validated this, and they amped it up, and now we have what we have. But to me, that also seems like, in the age of information where everything spreads online so fast and so quickly, and we do get stuck in these echo chambers, and basically our FYPs or discovery pages or algorithms are interested in us being stuck in our echo chambers, because they don't necessarily serve us with information that is different from our confirmation bias, right? Same happens with AI search engines, and same happens with Google. If you're a Republican and you look up what happened in politics today, it's going to give you a very different rundown than if I look it up, right? So
Well,
to me,
well, let's look at L. Ron Hubbard, for example. Okay,
mhm,
so because I've done interventions to get people out of Scientology, and I've testified as a court expert on
yeah.
Scientology. So L. Ron Hubbard was adamantly opposed to the mental health profession. He didn't believe that you should see a mental health professional about anything, and of course there was that famous interview between Matt Lauer and Tom Cruise, in which Tom Cruise said that antidepressants were bad, and he denigrated Brooke Shields for having taken antidepressants to deal with postpartum depression. So what I look for when someone comes to me and they're talking, for example, my loved one in my family has become involved in Scientology. Previously, they participated in therapy, in counseling. They supported that. Now they're adamantly opposed to it. Previously, they would question pseudoscientific claims, but now they accept the purification rundown devised by L. Ron Hubbard as the means of getting toxins out of your body, even though science contradicts what Hubbard's basic theory was, that toxins reside indefinitely in fatty tissues of the body, which they don't. So what I look for is that kind of radical change where someone had long held beliefs, uh, close relationships, and suddenly they've changed. And they've changed in a way that directly contradicts their history, their personal history, and also that they begin to make choices that are against their own best interests. For example, if someone is middle class, they may max out their credit cards and go bankrupt over becoming involved in Scientology. It's very expensive. And so someone doing that, putting themselves in financial jeopardy, not paying bills in order to pay for Scientology, that would be the kind of destructive behavior that is not in their own best interest, but in the best interest of the group, Scientology, that would be a warning red flag saying something's wrong here. So these are the kind of things that happen in destructive cults. And you also alluded to who is vulnerable. I would say someone who's going through a difficult time, someone who feels, oh, I'm going through this divorce, someone died that's close to me, family member, uh, I'm not doing well in school or whatever. Something is not going well. There's a book, The True Believer, written by Eric Hoffer. And Hoffer has the basic theory that happy countries and happy people don't embrace radical change because they're saying, hey, I'm okay with how things are. And so you look at Nazi Germany, previous to the ascent of Adolf Hitler, they were going through a very, very difficult time as a country. And they were looking for answers. They were looking for relief. They had hyperinflation. They had horrible economic problems.
Yeah.
So you see that kind of change. And of course, Hoffer talks about the communist rise to power in Russia, coming on the heels of World War I, all of the losses in that war, very hard economic times, and the fact that the Romanov family, the Tsar, was not addressing their concerns. And
Hell yeah.
along comes Lenin, and he says, I've got a solution, I've got a way. And so the people were receptive. In the same way, someone who's going through a difficult time personally may be receptive to someone who says, why don't you come to this group seminar or this or that that sounds rather innocent or innocuous and is
Mm.
actually the introduction to a destructive cult. And so someone who's going through distress, they might they might be amenable to that. They might go along with that. But I don't see that same pattern with people in the Republican Party who have embraced Trump. Rather, these people were against abortion historically for many years. They believed in a kind of religious, uh, certitude in politics. And they also had very strong feelings about the Second Amendment and, gun rights and so on. So this was the underpinnings of the Republican Party that evolved over a period of time. It wasn't a radical change. And
Mhm.
I think that uh, that's a struggle for many people in the US right now, is to recognize that Kamala Harris got an enormous amount of votes, but Donald Trump got more. And the sentiments of those voters are disturbing to a lot of people in the United States and what that represents. But I don't think calling the people that voted for Trump brainwashed is a meaningful response.
Well, I mean, I personally don't think that it's people that voted for Donald Trump that might be brainwashed. I think that a lot of them were lied to, and a lot of people voted against. So a lot of people didn't understand what they're voting for. Like a lot of people now are like, "Wow, how is he doing all of this? This is not what I wanted." But he was saying exactly that. Is just that the messages that were amplified the loudest were, "Hey, your gas is about to like be less expensive," and had our education system in the U.S. not failed you, you would know that gas prices and presidents are not correlated by any means, right? It's not as linear. But I think that people, well, to me personally, the people that worship him and the people that think he can do no wrong, and the people that identify with the whole make America great again, those people that you see at rallies that journalists come up to, and I mean, I'm going to be rude here, but they sound psychotic, right? Like you're trying to reason with them and they have absolutely no critical reasoning whatsoever. And you show them facts and you give them all of that and they just like don't believe in it. Those people I think are brainwashed, quite brainwashed. I don't think the whole party is brainwashed. I'm not just like throwing that around, but I'm curious. So you said that you look for characteristics like, if someone is in a cult, you look for characteristics like if they went 180 on their beliefs. What about people that were born into cults? Like there are a lot of like kids that were born into Scientology. They're still in a cult and they're still acting against their best interest, but that's the only thing they've ever known.
Yeah, I did a podcast recently with Aaron Smith Levin, who grew up in Scientology, and he has a podcast, Growing Up in Scientology. And my heart goes out to those people because they were literally born into a destructive cult, in my opinion, and they had no choice in the matter, though I would argue that their parents may have been tricked and trapped into that same group. And currently, I have been involved in a legal proceeding in Guatemala. I submitted an expert witness report regarding a cult called Lev Tahor, which poses as ultra-Orthodox Judaism, but is in fact an idiosyncratic, destructive cult constructed by a man who really wasn't born an ultra-Orthodox Jew, but a secular Jew in Israel, then migrated to New York, and then was arrested for kidnapping and deported back to Israel, and then came to Canada, and then was under investigation for child abuse and various things in Canada. And eventually he moved the group into Latin America. And today they have a compound near Guatemala City in Guatemala. And this is, an example of a destructive cult. And many of the people that were recruited by this man, Shlomo Hilbrans, began as observant Jews in Orthodox Judaism, but were radicalized. And then still more were born into this group because the group has been around for decades. And they were raised with the idea that it's okay for girls at 12 to get married. And the women wear what I would describe as burqas, which are not like other ultra-Orthodox women. So what Helbrands taught them was not indicative or consistent with Hasidic Judaism or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, but rather reflected his own weird ideas and beliefs, which included abusing children. So the Guatemalan authorities have removed about 150 children from the compound outside of Guatemala City, and they're now under the protection of the government. Hopefully they will be reunited with relatives, family members in the US, Canada, and Israel eventually, but they cannot rely on their own parents to protect them who are under the control of Lev Tahor in Guatemala. So this is a very sad thing that occurs when you are born into a cult. You would want your family, your parents, to protect you and keep you safe. But if the group's beliefs supersede even parental prerogatives, children are not safe. For example, medical neglect, children not getting proper medical care or emergency care and dying needlessly because they are in a group that doesn't believe in medical care. Or if you're a parent and you're in Scientology, you would not seek mental health professional assistance if your child was, let's say, schizophrenic or bipolar and could be helped, or suicidal and in depression and could be helped. And so the parents, instead of doing what's best for their kids, will do what they feel is right according to Scientology, which is another example of parents acting against their own best interests, demonstrating that cult mindset, that the cult comes first, not your family, not your kids.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is very interesting. I think it's a subject that can be talked about for ages. I mean, I can also, I think it's very interesting because I'm very happy that whoever is going to watch this is going to have their definition of cults from an expert, and then can sort of draw their own conclusions from this. Because to me, right, the whole idea of acting against their own interests is like, spouses who voted for Trump, who said, I'm going to deport all immigrants, but they for some reason thought that their El Salvadorian husband was special or something, right? And now they do get deported, and they're like, but I voted MAGA. But it's like, okay, but you voted exactly for what he said he was going to do. So for me, it's these sort of interesting things that are kind of just, that are mind boggling and cult like. Maybe it's not necessarily a cult, but what I'm hearing here is that it has a lot of tendencies of a cult. Or
I think that Donald Trump's personality is very similar to some of the cult leaders that I've dealt with over the years, which is an inability to acknowledge when they're wrong, when they've made a mistake, and this kind of incessant narcissistic focus on themselves, and a lack of empathy for
yeah,
people that are less, uh, they see as less deserving, or that don't have their position of wealth and entitlement as they see it. But that alone does not define a destructive cult. And I think that you are right that many of the people that voted for Donald Trump may ultimately be disappointed with the results, because, for example, probably the deciding group that voted for Donald Trump did so because of the price of eggs, the price of gas, inflation, economics. They weren't concerned with religion, guns, or immigration. They were concerned with the economy and their bread and butter, their income, their well-being economically. And I think with all these people that may be deported from the United States, my question is, who is going to fill their jobs? And how is the economy going to survive? And then we're going through this, trade war with tariffs. How will that affect prices in the marketplace, regarding cars and the food and various things that we buy every day? So it's true that some of the people may be disappointed with the results. And of course, if Donald Trump is right and the economy is improved by the measures that he's taken, despite what many economic experts predict, those people will be gratified. They'll feel they voted good, they voted right, and they'll be satisfied with him. But I think that ultimately, what will be the test is, if things don't go well, how many of those supporters will stay with him? And people may choose to vote differently in the next election cycle. And that, again, would not reflect a destructive cult, but would reflect the democratic process in the United States. And that may ultimately be his undoing as a politician.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, as to labor laws and who's going to replace the migrant workers, queue in Florida that just relaxed child labor laws to substitute for the migrants they deported. This is welcome to modern America. What a beautiful place.
Well, that would probably cause a lot of Trump voters concern. They would wonder if that was, you know, a positive thing. I think they would think of it as negative. Also, people that are on Social Security
Mhm.
and Medicare, if those services do not continue to be maintained in such a way that people are happy, that's going to cause dissent as well. So I think that's all part of the process. It's not like a destructive cult where there's a dictatorial ruler and no one has a choice or a vote. Instead, the voting public will make the final verdict on whether they approve or they disapprove of these policies and whether they're for the ultimate good of the majority of the American people or not.
Yeah, well, I guess we shall see. Only time will tell. I get we have, now we have some elections. There is another one in 2 years, so fingers crossed. I just sit here from Ukraine, and I know how dictatorial leaders come to power because I've seen many of those. I'm close to Romania, I'm close to Russia, seeing one right now attacking my country. I wonder what's going to become of America in 2 years and whether there is 2 years to wait for change. But that's a whole separate subject. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a very interesting conversation. I actually rarely speak to people that disagree with me because I normally talk to experts on war, and usually, it's all quite linear. But it was very interesting, and I hope to have you here again at some point.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope this conversation was as interesting and productive for you as it was for me. Because for me, it certainly was something special. I rarely these days get to talk to people whose opinions differ so drastically from mine and to have a discussion, a civil discussion with them about it. So I really enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to hear more conversations like it, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, and of course, send it to a friend, like this video, and leave all of your thoughts, questions, suggestions, everything you might have on your mind in the comments down below. I'll read all of it and I'll try to incorporate it into the next episodes. See ya.